The gavel struck like thunder, and the room fell silent. Every eye turned. Every breath slowed. For a moment, the chamber was frozen, a stage waiting for its players. Marco Rubio leaned back in his chair, lips curling into a smirk. He had waited for this chance. The cameras were rolling, the audience hushed, the tension thick enough to cut. Then, with a voice dripping in confidence, he spoke. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, stretching her name like a warning. "You sound politically naive." The word landed like a slap across the chamber. Gasps flickered through the crowd. Notes shuffled. A few heads turned to hide quick smiles, others to stifle shock. The smirk lingered on Rubio's face, as if he had already won. Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She sat straight, her hands calm on the desk, her eyes fixed on him. Time slowed to a heartbeat. Rubio's smirk widened. "Politics is not a classroom, Congresswoman. This is the real world." The silence was sharper than words. Every whisper carried weight, rising, falling, bouncing off the chamber walls. Some muttered, others leaned in, waiting for her reply. She stayed still. She let the insult hang in the air like smoke. It was a silence that unsettled even him. Rubio shifted, tapping his pen against the table. His smirk twitched, just enough for those watching closely to notice. He had thrown the first punch, but no reaction came. The stillness became suspense. Her eyes didn't soften, didn't break. They sharpened, calculating. The chamber began to sense it. This was not defeat. This was not hesitation. This was patience, dangerous patience. Every second her silence stretched, the balance shifted. What was meant to humiliate her was turning into its own trap. Rubio chuckled under his breath, trying to break the tension. But the sound was hollow, nervous. The gavel's echo had faded, but something far louder was building. But what he didn't know was that her silence was a weapon. He leaned forward, convinced the room was his. Marco Rubio's posture said it all, confidence bordering on arrogance. He wasn't just answering questions, he was performing. For him, this wasn't about policy. It was about control. The chamber buzzed with quiet energy. Immigration was on the table, one of the most divisive and dangerous battlegrounds in politics. Families, futures, and reputations all hung in the balance. Every word carried weight, every pause carried risk. Eyes darted across the chamber. Some scribbled notes, others whispered under their breath, calculating which way the debate would tilt. Cameras shifted angles, red lights blinking like watchful eyes. Rubio knew the script. He painted himself as the steady hand, the seasoned statesman. He spoke of border security, of law and order, of strength. His tone was sharp, polished, ready for the evening news clips. But something in the air was shifting. Crockett leaned forward just slightly. Her questions were precise, clean, and sharper than they first appeared. "Senator, if law and order were your true compass, why do your own records point in every direction?" The words cut. Not loud, not aggressive, but surgical. Notes shuffled like nervous hands. Rubio pressed on, trying to bury the sting under more practiced lines. Yet the room felt it. Every exchange was no longer about substance alone. It was about control of the chamber. The underdog versus the establishment. Rubio's supporters whispered reassurance. Crockett's allies leaned in, eyes gleaming, sensing the tide. The audience wasn't passive anymore. They were players, weighing each blow, waiting for the moment someone slipped. One wrong word could tilt everything. Rubio tried to tighten the grip. He framed Crockett's questions as simplistic, as if they didn't understand the realities of governance. He gestured widely, claiming authority, daring her to push further. But the cracks were already visible. Each of her interruptions, calm, measured, deliberate, threw his rhythm off balance. She was not attacking for noise. She was dismantling, piece by piece. Gasps came at unexpected turns. At one moment, a colleague coughed to mask a laugh. At another, whispers turned into murmurs. The tension was electric. Crockett did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. She sharpened her questions like blades and left them hanging in the air, where Rubio had to answer. Senator, do you call it strength when your position bends with the wind? The chamber paused. His smirk tightened. It was no longer just a debate on immigration. It was a contest of credibility, of truth versus performance. The stakes weren't simply laws on paper. The stakes were trust, reputation, power. Rubio still looked sure of himself, but his rhythm faltered. His pen tapped louder. His glance shifted quicker. The audience noticed. The cameras noticed. And Crockett noticed most of all. The chamber was a battlefield, and the lines were drawn. Not between parties alone, but between arrogance and dignity, between those who assumed power belonged to them and those who proved otherwise. The silence of the previous insult had sharpened into a duel of words. The air was thick with suspense. And as Rubio leaned forward once more, ready to reclaim the stage, he didn't realize the ground beneath him was already shifting. But the history of the man mocking her would soon betray him. He had built a career on sharp words and sharp returns. Marco Rubio's rise was a story of precision, charm, and relentless ambition. From campaign trails to committee chairs, he had mastered the art of seeming unshakable. Every line rehearsed, every smile calculated, every pause timed for maximum effect. A smirk carried years of practiced arrogance, and the chamber had learned to fear it. But behind the polished image, cracks were forming. Confidence cracked at the edges. Behind the speeches, the press releases, the sound bites, there were contradictions, moments where ideals bent under pressure, where decisions clashed with words. Each misstep was a secret thread, waiting for the right hands to pull. His record on immigration, in particular, had its inconsistencies. He had championed reform, promised compassion, yet backed policies that left families in limbo. He spoke of borders, law, and order, but his voting history told a more tangled story. Every contradiction became a loaded gun, a weapon for those sharp-eyed enough to see it. "I've always put the country first," he would say. But critics and records alike whispered otherwise. Rubio thrived on confidence. He could speak, gesture, dominate the room, and most of the time, he did. Audiences were dazzled, colleagues intimidated. Yet the very bravado he wielded as armor masked fragility. One misstep could undo the image he had spent decades constructing. Political maneuvering had been his specialty. Deals brokered behind closed doors, compromises made for appearances, and strategic silences designed to evade scrutiny. His career was a chessboard, and he had always been 3 moves ahead, or so he believed. But arrogance has a price. It blinds. It assumes permanence in an environment that rewards exposure. The chamber he entered tonight, the very one meant to showcase strength, could become a mirror reflecting the gaps in his armor. There were moments in his past debates, his public speeches, and legislative votes where confidence disguised uncertainty. Where a question asked too sharply could unravel him. And history has a way of repeating itself, especially when someone is underestimated. His allies trusted his poise, his rivals respected his ambition, and the public often admired his polish. Few noticed the tension beneath the surface, the restless eyes in private meetings, the quickened pen taps before a crucial line. Those were signs of a man always on guard, yet never completely secure. "I don't fear tough questions," he had said countless times. And yet, each contradiction, each exposure of hypocrisy, was a question he could not fully control. Tonight, facing Crockett, all of it, the past stances, the shifting positions, the moments where he had appeared untouchable, hovered in the air like charged particles. The audience, both in the chamber and watching from afar, could sense the tension building, even if they couldn't name it yet. Every line he prepared, every jab intended to unsettle her, was shadowed by the record he could not erase. A single misstep from him could ignite the contradictions, and the room would remember everything he tried to forget. The villainy was clear, arrogance hiding fractures, ambition masking flaws, confidence masking uncertainty. Rubio was formidable, yes, but his armor had gaps. And someone like Crockett, sharp, observant, unafraid, could see them. But what happens when those turns collide with the truth? She was never supposed to sit here, and yet here she was. Jasmine Crockett's journey was anything but ordinary. From the very beginning, people underestimated her. Teachers, peers, even early mentors had dismissed her sharpness, misjudged her drive, and overlooked the fire burning just beneath her calm exterior. Every dismissal became fuel. Every doubt became a stepping stone. Every setback forged steel. She grew up learning that the world often rewards volume over substance. Loud voices, polished images, and entitlement often drown out intelligence and dignity. But Crockett had a different kind of power. She listened, observed, and calculated. Her intellect wasn't loud, it was precise. Her words didn't just land, they struck exactly where they needed to. In law school, she learned to fight in hostile rooms. Moot court battles, tense negotiations, relentless professors, each challenge was a training ground. Her calm was not silence, it was strategy. Every argument carefully crafted, every question anticipating the response, every pause measured to maximize impact. Her early career in public service was shaped by those often overlooked, working families, marginalized communities, and people whose voices were drowned out in policy debates. She learned not just to speak for them, but to amplify their experiences in ways that demanded attention. Justice isn't just a word, she would tell colleagues. It's a responsibility. Despite the long hours, setbacks, and occasional ridicule, Crockett's resolve never wavered. She turned barriers into lessons, criticism into preparation, and doubt into clarity. She understood that every challenge was a mirror, reflecting not what she lacked, but what she could sharpen. By the time she entered Congress, Crockett was already formidable. She had a reputation for asking questions that cut to the heart of an issue, for refusing to be intimidated, and for handling every room, no matter how hostile, with grace and intelligence. Dignity became her weapon. Those who underestimated her learned quickly that her silence could speak louder than any roar. Even in the public eye, her calm earned respect. Media commentators noted her poise, colleagues admired her precision, and opponents, those who tried to throw her off, were often left frustrated by her unwavering presence. Her approach was methodical, but it was also human. She never lost sight of the people she represented. Each policy question, each debate, each challenge was framed not just as a political maneuver, but as a responsibility to real lives. She understood that true power comes not from domination, but from representing those who cannot. We measure leadership not by titles, but by the people who feel heard, she said once, eyes steady, voice unwavering. The contrast with someone like Rubio was stark. Where he relied on smirks, rehearsed lines, and assumptions of superiority, Crockett relied on clarity, intelligence, and dignity. Where he saw politics as performance, she saw it as duty. Where he projected confidence, she wielded integrity as armor. Her reputation was built quietly but unmistakably. Allies admired her resilience, opponents feared her precision, and the public began to notice that when Crockett spoke, it was impossible to ignore. She didn't just argue, she illuminated, revealing truths that others preferred to keep hidden. Every moment of struggle, every room that doubted her, every underestimated step along the way had prepared her for this. The gavel, the chamber, the smirks, these were the moments she had trained for, the moments where patience met precision. And now, facing Rubio across the chamber, she was ready. Every lesson, every setback, every bit of fire she had carried inside was primed to meet the arrogance before her. The crowd could sense it, even if they couldn't articulate it. Something was about to shift. The underdog, the underestimated, the quiet but sharp intellect, it was about to meet the stage. And tonight the battle would demand every ounce of that fire. Words fired across the chamber like bullets. Rubio leaned into the microphone, eyes narrowed, as if daring Crockett to falter. His gestures were sharp, deliberate, each one designed to dominate the space, to assert authority. The room shook with whispers. Colleagues shifted in their seats, sensing the rising tension. Cameras clicked, capturing every twitch, every glance. "You speak as if the rules don't apply to you," Rubio sneered. But naivete isn't a virtue in this arena. Crockett's jaw didn't tighten. Her hands rested lightly on the desk, fingers interlaced, poised. Her calm wasn't weakness, it was preparation. Every word he fired, she catalogued, sharpened, and turned over in her mind. Her patience was a fuse burning down. Rubio pressed harder, sensing the gap he thought existed. Congresswoman, policies require experience. You can't just talk ideals and expect results. Interruptions sliced the air. Voices murmured from both sides. Some whispered encouragement, others muttered disagreement. The chamber felt like a pressure cooker. Every second stretched, taut with anticipation. Crockett leaned forward slightly, just enough to signal attention. She measured, calculated, then spoke. Experience isn't just tenure, she said, voice steady. It's understanding the real impact of laws on real people. The room stiffened. Every ear strained. Every eye turned. Rubio's smirk flickered, a twitch betraying him. Are you suggesting that policy should bend to compassion? He snapped, his voice sharp as glass. Crockett didn't blink. I'm suggesting that when policies hurt families, ignoring reality is the naivete, not addressing it. Gasps echoed softly. The chamber buzzed. Her words were precise strikes, leaving no room for deflection. Rubio tried to counter, but each statement he made now felt reactive, defensive. The rhythm he had relied on was fractured. Colleagues leaned forward. Allies of Crockett exchanged subtle nods. The audience sensed a shift. The underdog wasn't backing down. She was bending the pressure to her favor. Rubio tried a new tactic, sarcasm. So we should just open the borders and call it leadership, he quipped, voice dripping with condescension. Crockett's eyes didn't soften. If defending families is native, then I'll wear it like armor. The chamber froze. A pause felt like thunder. Even the reporters, pens poised, held their breath. Rubio's confidence wavered for a heartbeat too long. He had expected hesitation, maybe stammering, but not the calm, sharp-fire response he just received. Short exchanges continued. Snide remarks bounced off the walls, but Crockett remained steady. She absorbed, redirected, and sharpened every point. Her intellect was a mirror, reflecting his arrogance back at him with precision. Leadership isn't a performance, she said, voice low but cutting. It's accountability. It's seeing the people behind the policy. The room felt charged, ready to explode. Every interruption, every jab, every whisper built the tension higher. The audience could almost see the fuse sparking in the air. Rubio's smirk was gone, replaced by a tightening jaw, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. His tempo faltered. Every sentence felt heavier. Every rebuttal felt reactive. Her patience had done more than survive the attack, it had unsettled the attacker. And then, her counterstrike began. Her words cut through the chamber like glass breaking. Crockett leaned forward, eyes sharp, voice steady. Every movement was controlled, deliberate, precise. Every word was a blade. She began her counterattack, dismantling Rubio's carefully constructed image line by line, exposing contradictions he had thought buried. Senator, she began, her tone calm but electric. You speak of law and order, yet your record shows support for measures that fractured families at the border. You champion security, yet millions of stories of hardship tell a different tale. Gasps filled the silence. The chamber froze. Even Rubio's allies shifted uneasily. His smirk collapsed. The rhythm he had relied on for decades was breaking under the weight of truth. If defending families is naive, then I'll wear it like armor. Her words landed with precision. The audience reacted before the cameras could even capture the moment. Eyes widened. Colleagues leaned in. Even those who usually ignored her voice were listening, captivated. Respect rippled through the crowd. Rubio opened his mouth to speak, but Crockett didn't let him. She continued, each line sharper, each point undeniable. You speak as if compassion is a liability. Yet policies you've supported have forced children into cages, separated parents from their homes, and turned human lives into statistics. How is that leadership? The room was silent. Every whisper had vanished. Every camera caught the tension. She didn't shout. She didn't flail. Her calm, her clarity, and her dignity became more powerful than any smirk or condescension. Rubio's fingers tapped the desk nervously. The smirk he had carried like armor now trembled at the corners. He tried to regain control. "Congresswoman, you—" But Crockett cut him off with a pause so deliberate it landed like a punch. "No, Senator. You answer for your own record. Not for rhetoric. Not for optics. Answer for what you've done." The chamber shivered. Gasps filled the silence again. Every reporter, every camera, every observer felt the weight of her words. The underdog had turned the room upside down. She walked through his contradictions with methodical precision, connecting the dots that Rubio had hoped would remain invisible. Each juxtaposition was a strike: promises versus actions, claims versus reality. "You claim to defend the vulnerable, yet your policies have often left them voiceless. That is not strength. That is negligence disguised as authority." Her voice didn't rise, but it cut sharper than any shout. The pressure in the chamber mounted. Even seasoned colleagues whispered among themselves, leaning closer, caught in the drama unfolding. Every word Crockett spoke chipped away at Arrogance, layer by layer. Crockett paused briefly, letting her statements linger in the air. The tension was palpable. Rubio's hands clenched. His next words faltered. For the first time, he looked unsure in front of a live audience. "Naivete is a word you use to silence the uncomfortable truths you cannot answer," she said, voice steady. "But truth doesn't need your approval." The silence that followed was explosive. Respect, shock, and awe mingled in every corner of the room. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. This was more than a debate, it was a revelation. By now, social media was already reacting. Phones flashed, cameras streamed live. Within an hour, #JusticeForAll was trending nationwide. Her clarity, her composure, her ability to dismantle arrogance without losing dignity had captured hearts and headlines simultaneously. Leadership isn't about putting others down. It's about lifting people up, even when it's inconvenient for your narrative. Every word landed. Every pause calculated. Every contradiction exposed. Rubio tried to respond, but he was a step behind, constantly reacting to her sharp moves. She had seized control of the narrative. The chamber felt transformed. Where once there had been tension, now there was awe. Where once there had been arrogance, now there was exposure. Where once there had been a smirk, now there was doubt. Crockett didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She maintained her dignity, letting the facts and her composure speak for themselves. Her counterattack wasn't about winning applause, it was about delivering accountability. Gasps filled the silence once more as she concluded, her final words slicing cleanly through the room. "If defending families is naive, if truth is inconvenient, then I will stand here and speak it anyway. That is leadership. That is responsibility. That is justice." The room was stunned. Rubio's composure had crumbled completely. Colleagues whispered, some nodding, some shocked, all captivated. Respect, previously quiet, now reverberated like a drumbeat. Every camera caught the moment. Every observer understood it. Crockett had flipped the script. The underestimated had become the unstoppable. The arrogance had been met with clarity, precision, and unshakable dignity. And in that charged silence, the story was already spreading beyond the chamber walls. The shockwaves didn't stop inside the room. By dawn, the chamber's echoes had become headlines. Screens lit up with her words. Social media feeds were flooded with clips of Crockett's counterattack. Every outlet replayed the moment, slow-motion replays of her calm precision, captions highlighting her sharp lines, analysts debating the impact. His silence became its own story. Rubio's attempts to recover were overshadowed by the viral storm she had created. Allies reached out immediately. Messages, calls, and private congratulations poured in. Colleagues whispered admiration for her composure, noting how she had taken the offensive while maintaining grace. Even critics, those who had doubted her, hesitated to attack. The power shift was undeniable. She didn't just win the room, one colleague said, eyes wide. She rewrote the rules of engagement. The public reaction was electric. Clips circulated, hashtags trended, and opinion columns dissected her performance. By sunrise, headlines called it a defining moment. Citizens debated, applauded, and shared the moments of her precision. Hashtag Justice for All surged across platforms, giving momentum to a narrative few could ignore. In the chamber, the aftermath was palpable. Rubio, once unshakable, moved cautiously. His gestures were smaller, measured. He tried to comment, to regain the floor, but the room's attention had shifted. Where he had once commanded focus, Crockett now held it. The weight of exposure lingered. Every contradiction he had tried to mask now danced in public view. Her opponents watched in disbelief. Allies of Rubio whispered strategies, but even they could not ignore the shift. The momentum was hers, and it wasn't just a single debate moment. It was the foundation of influence, a turning point. Crockett herself remained composed. She didn't celebrate. She understood that while this victory was meaningful, it was also fragile. Public attention was fleeting, and political adversaries were always ready to strike back. Yet she allowed herself a brief moment to feel the surge of vindication, the satisfaction that truth, clarity, and dignity had won over arrogance. "This isn't about applause," she said quietly to an aide. "It's about the people who need their stories heard." Analysts and commentators debated the significance for hours. Some called it a masterclass in accountability. Others labeled it a turning point in public perception of political debate. Every report, every clip, every tweet reinforced her rise, not as an accident, but as the result of preparation, intelligence, and unwavering resolve. The chamber's echoes had left the building and entered the public sphere. Her influence began to grow beyond the walls, beyond the debate stage, reaching citizens, voters, and policy observers alike. The ripple effect of one performance could no longer be contained. And yet Crockett knew the battle was far from over. Media attention, viral moments, and trending hashtags were powerful, but they were also fleeting. Opponents would study, critique, and prepare. The narrative could shift again if she allowed complacency. Still, the night's work had established her credibility. The underdog had stood firm, and the public, the press, and even political peers had taken notice. Respect, once quiet, now had volume. Influence, once nascent, now had a foothold. And the villain who had tried to mock her was left rattled, exposed, and uncertain. In the quiet moments between interviews and trending alerts, Crockett's team prepared for the next stage. Plans, messaging, and strategy were discussed, knowing the next challenge would arrive quickly. The glow of victory was tempered by the realism of politics. The world had seen what dignity, precision, and clarity could do. The stakes were higher now. The influence she had earned was real, but so were the dangers ahead. But what does victory mean when the fight never ends? In the end, it wasn't volume that won, it was truth. Crockett had faced arrogance head-on. She had confronted smirks, condescension, and rehearsed superiority. And she had done it not with noise or theatrics, but with clarity, precision, and unwavering dignity. Truth stood taller than noise, cutting through pretense, exposing hypocrisy, and illuminating what mattered most: justice, responsibility, and the voices of the overlooked. The chamber, once tense and charged with confrontation, had quieted into a lesson in restraint and power. Every observer, every camera, every journalist noted the difference. Her silence was not weakness, it was strategy. Her calm was not compliance, it was authority. Her dignity turned into fire, burning through layers of arrogance and false confidence. "Leadership is not a performance," she had said. "It is accountability, clarity, and service." The lesson extended far beyond the debate stage. For citizens watching, it was proof that intelligence and integrity could still triumph over bluster and ego. For colleagues in the chamber, it was a reminder that underestimation could be costly. For aspiring leaders, it was an inspiring model: preparation, poise, and moral courage were weapons sharper than any smirk or shouted lying. Rubio's defeat was not total humiliation, but it was a reckoning. He had underestimated the strength and quiet confidence, and the power of truth delivered with dignity. His contradictions were laid bare, and his confidence had been pierced by facts, logic, and unflinching resolve. The public reaction reinforced the moral. Social feeds were filled with admiration for Crockett's composure. Analysis praised her strategic brilliance. Educators, students, and civic groups discussed the moment in terms of lessons on leadership, critical thinking, and ethics. The applause wasn't for spectacle, it was for integrity. Her story became a reminder: in politics, where power often favors noise over substance, an underdog can claim victory through preparation, honesty, and courage. It was not merely about winning a debate, it was about changing the narrative, proving that respect and clarity could overcome arrogance and manipulation. "Naivete is not weakness," she had said. "Silence is not surrender. Integrity is not optional." The chamber, the cameras, the public, all had witnessed the same truth: dignity could crush pretense, and intellect could dismantle performance. Her silence was remembered louder than his words. Her precision became a model for accountability. Her poise inspired hope that politics could still reward merit, clarity, and courage. In quiet reflection, Crockett understood the significance. This was more than a victory over a single adversary. It was a demonstration that the underdog, armed with preparation and integrity, could shift perceptions, influence policy debates, and remind the public that leaders are accountable for every word and action. The moral clarity was unmistakable. Arrogance falters under truth. Hypocrisy cannot withstand dignity. The chamber, once a battlefield, became a testament to the power of intellect and moral courage. For those watching, the story offered hope. Hope that political discourse could still value substance. Hope that careful preparation and unwavering ethics could succeed against the loudest voices. Hope that the next generation could learn that courage and respect are not mutually exclusive. Crockett had turned a moment of potential humiliation into a triumph of principle. She had not just defended herself, she had elevated the standards of debate, demonstrating that integrity could lead, that clarity could prevail, and that the underdog, when armed with strategy and conscience, could rewrite expectations. But one question remains: who will be next to underestimate her? The chamber lights dimmed, but the story burned on. The echoes of the debate lingered in the air, whispers of truth, flashes of dignity, and the memory of a smirk fading under relentless clarity. The fight was far from over. Politics, like a thriller, thrived on tension, twists, and unpredictable turns. Yet tonight, integrity had taken the lead. The lights faded. Cameras clicked one last time. Social media buzzed, hashtags trended, and viewers carried the shockwaves beyond the chamber walls. Every eye that watched had witnessed more than a debate. They had witnessed a lesson in courage, strategy, and moral clarity. Her victory wasn't just for the moment. It was a signal to all underdogs: preparation, dignity, and sharp intellect can turn the tide against arrogance and hypocrisy. If you want more cinematic political showdowns, subscribe now. Witness every twist, every shock, and every moment where the underestimated rise and the arrogant are exposed. The silence lingered, but the tension promised more. The story was far from finished. And the next clash will be even sharper.